Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the National Bank of Fujairah, I'm pleased to welcome you all. I am Gavin Quass, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Today, we'll be focusing on the growing role of Treasury is playing within organisations. Treasury has evolved over the last 5 years from being largely perceived as a back office support function to an integral value-added aspect of the business. Technological advancements have further enabled banks and firms to harness the power of innovative systems such as enterprise resource planning and treasury management systems, helping Treasury clients with strategic decision making. To continue with the session and insights, today I have on the panel with me Caroline Stockman, Chief Executive of Association of Corporate Treasurers, Nagarajan Ravichandran, who is the Group Head Treasury of Indica Group Limited, and Bharadwaj Raghavan, Interim Head of Treasury Sales in the Treasury Department at the National Bank of Fujairah. This webinar is part of the NBF knowledge sharing efforts, where our aim is to increase awareness of common trends, challenges, and opportunities to help individuals and businesses with resources not only to operate, but grow and develop even further in today's transforming environment. NBF's efforts and services are continuously recognized by a number of industry accolades, including the recent titles of the Best SME Bank and Most Innovative Emerging Technologically Implementation by MEE Finance Awards. You'll also see a poll on the right-hand side. I would ask that our listeners, please, are able to fill in that poll. You have about 10-12 minutes to complete that, which will give us some answers to look at during the presentation. Towards the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A session. So in case any questions come to mind during the session, please share them through the Q&A tab, and we will address them at the end of the session as much as possible. So I thought I'd start with just an introduction first before we bring in our first speaker. Treasury has evolved over the last 5 years, as I mentioned, from predominantly being perceived as this sort of back office support function to this very integral value-added aspect of the business. And there's a couple of key points here that we've sort of mentioned, and I'll sort of go through them. I think since one of the reports from JP Morgan highlighted that since the crisis or since COVID-19, it's accelerated new impetus to adoption of new technologies such as APIs, robotic process automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. There was a report done, and out of that, 80% of companies either have implemented APIs or are looking to use them in the future. And there was only 10% of respondents that said they do not expect to sort of use machine learning or AI or foresee that as being of significant benefit. Strategically, Treasury teams are increasingly stepping out of their traditional roles to contribute to broader initiatives within organizations. And what that probably means is strategically helping the organization in direction for where it can go, because it has access to very useful data and information. One of the reports found that out of 130 global Treasury professionals, there were 3 issues facing Treasury transformation. One of those being data accuracy and availability that will impact things like cash flow forecasting and optimizing of working capital. Irritants, things like very simple wet signatures, what I would classify as the manual processes. And then the third piece being their cybersecurity. And one of the final findings was over half of treasuries are now involved in their company's strategic shifts or changes in business models. North America obviously leads the way with 70% of people in those departments really being part of that strategic team. Asia Pacific probably falling a little bit behind with only 44% of respondents from that region. So as I said, these are our lovely guests today. Welcome everyone. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, but just for the listeners, great obviously panel on here today, very experienced, so I hope everybody enjoys it. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, It's Caroline Stockman. Caroline, are you there? You're with us?
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much for joining us. Obviously, I hope the weather's nice there in sunny England. Would you like to just introduce yourself? Obviously, your background, ACT. I think the listeners will be very interested in hearing.
Well, thanks very much, Gavin. So my background, I'm a qualified accountant as well as a trained musician and coach. An interesting combination. Now Chief Executive of the Association of Corporate Treasurers, and I've been doing that for 5.5 years now. So my career, aside from being a professional musician, etc., was mainly in large blue chip corporates, the likes of Unilever for many years in senior finance positions. And then I moved into the not-for-profit sector and worked in international organisations again, such as Save the Children, British Council, and then now with the Association of Corporate Treasurers. I've really enjoyed an international career because I'm also a linguist. The Association of Corporate Treasurers, we provide training and continuing education for treasurers, starting from fundamentals up to master's level. We hold all kinds of events, virtual and live. We've recently had our annual conference with over 1,000 delegates. We have a very large Middle East summit. Pre-COVID, we had 800 registrations at that, and we will be doing that again in September at the Madinat in Dubai. So we're really looking forward to that. Our members span across about 90 countries, and we have a magazine, The Treasurer, which is well worth a read, as well as lots of online content, really to promote our vision and mission, which is all about having expert treasurers who help their businesses and also their economies by knowing what they're doing, and for us to spread that word in terms of education and building the Treasury community around the world.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that. Really diverse. I think for the listeners, some of those will be in common with our listeners. So really diverse and gives them a good sort of feel. I think with that brings us nicely onto one of the questions. Given your broad experience in various industries, as you mentioned, and locations around the world, how has the sort of Treasury department, I guess, changed, particularly over the last 10, maybe 20 years? I mean, that's quite a big span, but it'd be interesting to know, I think, as a starting point, and then where we might go to in terms of digital adoption.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think there's two parts to it, really. On one level, Treasury, the fundamentals of Treasury, which are really important to grasp. It's not about accountancy. It's very different. It's forward-looking. It's externally looking, and those fundamentals haven't changed significantly, I would say. So Treasury, it's about the same things, but I think over time we've certainly got a lot more sophisticated. So if we look, we've just held in March our Deals of the Year awards. We had around 100 entries, and it was amazing. Some of the deals, they were so complex because they involved so many different elements, which you would possibly not have seen so much of in the past, with some exceptions. And the focus, of course, on ESG within those deals is huge, which again, 3 years ago you would not have seen. So that is a change, maybe the sophistication to some extent. I think also, and tied into that, is technology. So clearly technology is helping people do things differently from in the past. 20 years ago, did people really have treasury management systems? Many not. And those have developed rapidly over the last years. And then all the other kinds of offerings, shall we say, from the digital world, the fintechs that are setting up to do specialized or cover specialized areas that are useful to the treasurer.
Yep.
I would also say, and we see in our Business of Treasury research that the ACT carries out every year, we see over the last years, and we've been doing this research for 10 years, approximately 200 global treasurers input to it each year. And we're seeing a clear trend where the treasurer becomes more and more strategic, as you've already mentioned. It's closer and closer to their board. That's been accelerated through COVID. And we saw really for the first time in all that period, where we saw this strengthening of their strategic influencing skills, It's the first time we've really seen them actually driving strategy or being acknowledged as driving strategy. And that's really, really important to them, and I think important to businesses and economies, because the Treasurer does have a lot of knowledge which is very useful for the rest of the business in these times of extreme geopolitical and other uncertainty.
Yes, I was going to say, I think that coupled in nicely into some of the research that I did, that sort of, I would call it sort of strategic importance at a far senior level than maybe what it was beforehand, and helping sort of create the direction as well, or at least give very good information on where to go. And I think that, again, ties in nicely then to our next question, which is more to do with the personnel then within the Treasury Department. You sort of mentioned some of the aspects there, strategy, digital, what challenges do you think some of these personnel are then going to be facing, and some of these departments are going to be facing in that sort of treasury field?
Okay, so what they're saying at the moment, first and foremost, people. It's recruiting and retaining people is a huge, huge challenge at the moment. We talk about the Great Resignation. There's also people who are talented are in short supply, and people who have Treasury backgrounds are in short supply. And I should say that it will vary from geography, because there are geographies that are still developing Treasury talent, and there's those where it's more established, shall we say. So that's one big point. Another big challenge at the moment, of course, is inflation, interest rate rises, etc., all tied together, of course. And it's something that many treasurers have not experienced in their career. So it's only our very much more, shall we say, senior or recently retired treasurers who will have a lot of experience there. So that's something that we're trying to share that experience amongst the community, so people can think about what they need to think about. And I think two areas of technology are also very high on the list. One is cybercrime. So people are very much focused on that and see it as one of the biggest issues. And of course, if you work in a Treasury department, you will be a target for such crime. So that is on the more negative side, shall we say. Then the more positive side is, of course, the technology developments that we're talking about today, and how the treasurers can use that so that they can be more effective in their work and focus more on the strategic. But the challenge there, of course, comes down to budgets. And it's always the same way. An IT investment is often a substantial investment. How do you get your organization to come behind you and support what you would like to do? And my top tip on this as a coach is, people find it much easier to say no than to say yes. So if you go out there and say, can we please have this new system that will really help Treasury, it'll be very easy for them to say no. But if you say, on the other hand, do you think we can really afford to not be affecting our transactions in a smooth and digitally secure way?
Yes.
And the answer is going to be no, and then you're going to get your system.
Very good. Yeah, so sort of taking a different approach so that way you can work around it. I think that is you sort of hit the nail on the head when you sort of said about the whole different aspects between, obviously, the whole sort of inflation, the rapid movements in FX that is happening. Then you got on the other side, you've got sort of, the digital side that is also occurring. It's almost a bit of an unusual storm for people that have probably not been through anything like this in terms of experience, and that'll be certainly an interesting time ahead. What do you think then the future roles, you sort of mentioned on some points there, but what do you think some of those future roles within Treasury are gonna look like? You sort of mentioned strategic, but I'm not sure if you're able to think how some of them might come about.
Yeah, so I think using technology to free up time so you can put more into the strategic side is vital. And there are things that machines can do better than humans, particularly when we're dealing with big data, etc. And you want to free up people to not be doing those kind of fiddly things that aren't really adding value, but actually using their thinking power, their brain power to strategically influence. And I think we're seeing, the future of the treasurer is really to be steering the finances or the financial ship of the organization. It's really their expertise is how to manage financial risk and opportunity. So how do you keep the risk level to an acceptable level for the particular organisation to fit with their risk appetite? But how do you then seize the opportunities that are there to drive innovation, growth, etc.?
And I have another question. It's not on the list, but I'll put it out there because you sort of mentioned about your sort of global look for ACT. When you're looking at geographical locations, is there certain areas that are far more advanced in this sort of new future role of Treasury versus other areas that are maybe playing catch up? And what do you think those secondary areas can do to speed that process?
So I would say that if you look around the geographies in terms of the establishment of Treasury and really understanding Treasury and not just kind of vanilla stuff, you would say that the UK and rest of Europe are the leaders. You would say that the US comes somewhat behind. They tend to have much more of a cash focus and less on other areas. Also, they're a little bit behind on ESG considerations. And then you would say other areas, and Asia's a huge area. So, you know, I can't really put, Australia's more like UK.
Yes.
Same with New Zealand than say some of the other parts of Asia. But you say some areas in Asia, they're very much focused on, they employ accountants and they're not trained in Treasury. So they are lagging behind because of that on the Treasury front. And similarly in the Middle East, there are many organizations that have proper group Treasury functions and are doing very well. But there are many others that again have, and I say this as an accountant myself, you know, they have many acccounantants, but your skill set is not the same. And there needs to be a boost for the Treasury skill set. So then if we look at technology and the drivers behind that, I would say generally people are not adopting it as quickly as they should or might. And I would say it's an opportunity for those who are trying to catch up on their Treasury skills to also be able to bring in technology to help them. So it's a bit like some of the things that we've seen, say, in Africa in the past. You know, they jumped to mobile phones and forgot about landlines. So some of the technology, like M-Pesa technology and so on, was ahead there, where some other elements were behind. So I think it's an interesting time to see what will happen and who will kind of win that race, if you like.
Well, look, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very much. I'm going to get you to come back at the Q&A as well. And obviously, I'm sure we'll have plenty more questions. So thanks, Caroline.
Thank you.
We're going to get the polls that are going to come up any minute with the answers. There was only 3 questions. While I do that, I'm just going to bring in our next speaker, Bharadwaj Raghavan, who's the interim head of Treasury at NBF. Bharadwaj, how are you? Okay.
Very well, Gavin. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, good. Thank you. So just before I get you to introduce yourself, I'm just going to go through some of the findings. I think some of the findings slightly skewed. I know our first question, which was, are you planning to sort of implement any digital initiatives within the Treasury function? While there was a number that didn't answer, there was still quite a fair few that were leaning towards yes on that. So I think to Caroline's point, she said earlier, there is that sort of digital move that people are going to do. When we looked at the second question, do you feel there's appropriate training? I think what was interesting there is it was sort of 50-50 on the answers that came back, yes and no. You know, that'll be sort of an interesting talking point. And then the last question, which again is quite interesting. Do you believe the adoption of blockchain technology in the Treasury function can help organizations? Obviously, clear out yes there. And so again, that brings us back to you know, so some of Caroline's comments. Bharadwaj, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners and just give an overview on yourself and the area you cover, and then we can probably go into some of the questions.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. I'll keep my introduction short. Bharadwaj Raghavan, Interim Head of Treasury Sales, being with National Bank of Fujairah since 2013, held various positions within the Treasury Department. Previously, I worked with Bank of Nova Scotia, Mashreq, and Standard Chartered Bank in their Treasury departments again. And I specialize in sales of FX, commodities, and interest rate sales. Over to you, Gavin.
Thanks, Bharadwaj. So obviously Caroline mentioned some points there, which I think was great, and sort of mentioned some elements around digital evolution. I think that'll be one of the main points that we'll dive straight into straight away. Why is digital evolution within the Treasury Department important for financial institutions?
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question to ask. I think if you take a step back and probably look at traditionally how Treasury was defined, the two vital aspects Treasury has to, or rather had to perform, one was cash and liquidity management, and the other one is risk management. Now, the scope of Treasury management as such today has gotten much, much broader. It is not just cash and liquidity management and risk management. Treasury is now expected to give its inputs when it comes to the organization's overall strategy and direction. Now, as a Treasury, it is quite important that you invest in the right technologies if you're able to contribute towards an organization's overall growth. If I take an example, Treasury has to invest in its data capabilities, for example, if it has to lead this transformation. Treasury has to invest in APIs or application programming interfaces if it is looking to connect, let's say, two Treasury software systems. Treasury has to invest in robotic process automations today if it has to make its operational activities more efficient and also reduce the turnaround times. Now, secondly, and I think more importantly, I think if I look at this region, the GCC region, if you look at the banks, the treasuries in these banks do not operate, most of them do not operate on a 24/5 basis. Whereas if you look at the markets are 24/5. So what that actually means is if a client wants to hedge a certain exposure after the banking hours, unfortunately, he or she will have to wait for the next day till the bank actually opens up and cover the market risk. To give you a very specific example, if a customer wants to buy, let's say, 100,000 euros, let's say, and the rates are favorable at 107 to the dollar at, let's say, 7 p.m. Dubai time, the bank might have already closed, and the client will have to wait till the next day morning at 8 o'clock to cover that risk. So by which time, especially on a volatile scenario, it's quite possible that the markets have moved against the customer. So that's why it's quite important that the banks in this region need to offer some kind of a digital platform which can help the client hedge the exposure, be it FX exposure, interest rate exposure, or commodity exposure. The other thing, the other thing which also comes to my mind is, investments always need not be in, artificial intelligence or RPAs or machine learning. It can also be in your basic infrastructure. A simple example is the telephone systems which treasuries use in this region. Now, most of the transactions still, if you see clients call in the treasury dealing room, they transact with the client over the telephone. Now, one very important aspect for a bank is to ensure that they validate the person who is calling in. There are few people who are authorized on behalf of the customer who can transact with the bank. If, as a treasury person, I'm not able to validate that person, that's a huge risk which I'm actually taking. So, in fact, I remember in one of my previous organizations, we still used to, ask security questions in order to validate the person who is calling in, just like a credit card, questions like, what is your mother's maiden name, which is quite inappropriate, right? So we have come a far way from there. And the telephone systems which the banks in this region are adopting now has got voice recognition softwares. So they can tell you who is calling in, and the validation is much simpler. The transactions can get executed in a more efficient manner.
I think that brings us nicely on to the next question there. Obviously, the GCC, like any other geographical region, has its own sort of challenges. But, what challenge do you think is happening within the Treasury function that is sort of stopping more adoption from digital initiatives?
I think one of the key challenges, the first challenge which actually comes to my mind is, your investments which are already done in your legacy systems. and probably some reluctance from top management to invest in new systems because you have already made a certain amount of capital expenditure. Now, if you are looking to invest again, then you pretty make sure that you're going with a proper cost benefit analysis and a proper study before you go to your top management. Now, again, there are ways which can be adopted. For example, Caroline was mentioning earlier, fintech companies have sprung up. These fintech companies have actually seen visible gaps in the product and operational capabilities of firms, be it small, medium-sized, or large-sized firms. These fintech companies can today offer off-the-shelf or customized products for you in a very efficient manner. The other thing also which comes to my mind is, the threat to employment, right? Now, automation and digitalization can actually make a lot of jobs redundant. So it is important for the firm before they begin their digital journey to assess the impact of implementation of these platforms at the firm-wide level. So it's also important from an individual's perspective as an employee. I keep myself updated because opportunities will spring up, and you have to keep yourself updated, your skill set top-notch, so that you remain valuable to the firm.
Yeah, I think that, that point that you've mentioned there, I remember a long time ago when you used to look at accountants, and I'm sure Caroline will know this, but accountants used to be perceived as sitting in the corner, paying the bills, number crunching, and providing financial accounts. And sort of in the mid 2000s, it started a shift towards management accountants and actually giving proper financial analysis that you could take, and then what you can take with that information and what you could use, and almost became very central to the organization around. And you're starting to see that now with compliance. You're starting to see that, I think, with Treasury. So a lot of these functions are becoming, again, that sort of pillar to help with the direction. Tell us, MBF has evolved its Treasury offering. What is it, and why has it been implemented?
I think MBF Treasury started the digital journey way back in 2016. Much before, of course, the pandemic. The pandemic only accelerated the whole process for us. Now, in 2016, if I remember right, NBF partnered with FIS Global, and it onboarded the Treasury front-end system at that point in time. Now, it also, last year, we onboarded a platform called as IntelliMatch, which is again from FIS. IntelliMatch is basically a reconciliation and a matching system, which does reconciliations in an automated fashion. It is also incorporates artificial intelligence, so it can draw patterns and it can make predictions. So that is something which was an internal deployment for us. Now, when it comes to customers, last year, National Bank of Fujairah launched the digital treasury platform, which is called as NBFX. Now, NBFX is a aggregator platform which actually provides liquidity in foreign exchange, gold and silver. Now, what I mean by aggregator is now NBF has got so many counterparties with us, right? So if I want to seek a price to purchase a certain currency or a commodity, NBF has the capability to approach those 20 counterparties, get the best price, show it to the customer. But now it's obviously a very tedious task to do manually. So the platforms which come up these days, they do the aggregation facility where all the counterparties are basically showing you a price on the platform, but only the best price of those, let's say 20 counterparties, are streamed back to the customer. So when a client seeks a price on the platform, he sees the best price amongst 20 different banks and executes real time. So all this happens in a matter of milliseconds, and the confirmations go through digitally as well. So this is what NBF has done in terms of the digital transformation.
Oh, great. And I think that's going to bring us on nicely to our next speaker. I'm just going to wrap up with one more question. And I sort of asked Caroline a similar question. Just very briefly, what do you think the Treasury function future is going to look like, and particularly how clients are going to communicate?
Yeah, the communication ever since I've been in Treasury, it all started off with those fax machines, telephone conversations, paper confirmations. I mean, they still continue in many regions, which is a bit surprising. Now, as I said, digital platforms are very much necessary for clients. They have to be, I mean, banks have to provide them so that, it's not practical for every bank to be open on a 24-hour basis. So the next best thing is probably to offer a digital platform. If I look at how National Bank of Nigeria launched the internet banking service a few years back, there was some kind of a reluctance to adopt internet banking. But if I look at now, I think around 95% of the transactions initiated through the bank actually goes through online banking, and only 5% is manual transactions. So I think we should see that way forward when it comes to these digital platforms as well. And also when we talk about future, I think we can probably safely also mention to some extent that the importance of blockchain and treasury cannot be ignored. I think blockchain has got tremendous potential when it comes to payments, the security of payments, and also the speed of payments. So that is something I think we should all look forward to.
I was going to say, I think that's going to go nicely into some of the questions that we've got at the end. So Bharadwaj, thank you very much for that. I'll get you to come back at the end for some of the Q&A, but very useful. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nagarajan. Hello, how are you?
Hi Gavin, I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thank you. Would you like to take just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and Indica, and then obviously I'll go through some of the questions as well.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I thank NBF for inviting me on behalf of my company, and good afternoon all. I work as Group Head Treasury with Indica Group Limited, and I am with Indica since 2006. To give a brief introduction about my company, Indica was established in 1993, and we began trading in steel products. Later, we diversified ourselves into ferrous scrap trade in containers, which at that time it was an unexplored area. And ferrous scrap basically it is considered as the raw material to produce steel and steel finished products. So initially we started with Middle East and Indian subcontinents. Later we diversified ourselves into Southeast Asia and Vietnam. Then we spread our wings to coastal Africa and Pakistan. The demand for export of scrap metals was growing exponentially because the respective countries was concentrating in building up the infrastructures. So in 2013, we explored most of the Western countries, entire Europe, UK, and then US, everything. South America, North America. So from 2015, we started exporting billets also, steel billets, which is a semi-finished product in containers as well as in bulk shipments also. And that's when we explored the East Africa also. So to give the success story of Indica in short, we started trading 13,000 metric tons in 1993 with merely 500 containers and $3 million as revenue. Currently, we are doing 1.75 million tons globally, and we move almost 60,000 containers from one place to another place, and our revenue is close to 700 million US. And we spread over 160 locations in more than 40 countries and in 6 continents. This is the growth story of Indica in the last 30 years.
Great story. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and obviously it's going to lead in nicely because there's going to be lots of treasury work that you have to be involved with all those different locations as well.
Exactly.
Let's talk about your organization. What sort of challenges have you faced within the organization around sort of digital adoption, especially if we focus on that sort of treasury landscape?
See, as Mr. Bharadwaj said, when initially the internet banking was brought in, there were many people who were reluctant to adopt. So, but in case of Indica, we have been using the internet bankings or digital adaptation since 2010. So we didn't have any reluctance or any challenges to use it. But of course, each and every bank had their own interfaces and everything. So to get adapted to that was the initial hiccup. But other than that, we didn't face anything. The challenges are always there, and we have to get adapted to it as there is no other option to it. With treasury adoption also, it was initially there, but then we are very comfortable in using the digital platforms.
Okay, great. And what sort of, I guess, when you're looking again within the different elements within treasury, obviously it's quite broad, whether you're looking at FX or whichever aspects, is there sort of one of the areas there that's probably most pressing from a digital evolution or adoption perspective, taking out manual processes fully, just trying to work out which ones are sort of top, which one's bottom?
I will say accessibility. The digital platform gives us the accessibility. As Bharadwaj said, Like, the treasury desk has a timing. After 7 o'clock, we can't reach out to anybody. This was the case until a few years back. As I said, we operate from UK, South Africa, Brazil, Poland, like time difference.
Yes.
5 o'clock, yeah, here Dubai time 5 o'clock. Back in Poland or UK, it's 2 o'clock or 3 p.m. only. So still the suppliers are active for us for our
Yes.
trade. So we will have to book a deal with our supplier and we will have to cover the risk factor, which is not the case until the digital platforms were introduced. So once the digital platforms are introduced, it is at our hand. Like we can use it whenever we want. The risk factor is covered. I think that
Yes.
accessibility is what the most pressing aspect in the digital evolution, I would like to say.
Yeah, I think to that it's real time, so you
Yeah,
can get it, and hopefully it will move to 24/7, because, the time differences, the way businesses operate, you take into account other factors in that. And yeah, you sort of, particularly when you're probably looking at, the FX and the Treasury, it's a big piece to cover off hedging wise.
yeah.
Within the sort of the Treasury aspect again, how do you feel your employees are adopting to the digital world? So you mentioned there that since 2010, you've sort of done, you guys have already, or you've already been involved with the, online banking, but was there some sort of concern over that initially? And then if I look forward to where you are now, you're looking at this FX Treasury platform. Is there been some sort of apprehension around that as well from a digital perspective? Like, don't quite understand it, can't operate it, it's too technical, etc.
The initial apprehension will be like, to use the platform, like when we call the treasury desk, we just say what we want to do. We buy this currency, X amount, Y amount, everything. So when we ourselves have to feed that into the system, there comes the greater responsibility and risk also. So if we enter the site correctly, it's no issues. But if we enter the other way, instead of buying, if we enter it as selling, then again, like
Yes.
we go to the panic mode and then we call the treasury desk again. But with getting adopted to the digital thing for almost like 5 to 7 years before itself, so we are quite confident. Initial hiccups were there. I wouldn't say no, but then we are very adaptive to that, and we have been using it quite successfully regularly. So 24/5 we have been using it. There were times we used to book the deals till at 11 o'clock also, based on our
Well,
business needs.
well, I was going to say that'll lead into that last question very nicely. You've been using this MBFX quite well. How have you found it? How has it benefited the business? You sort of mentioned there, obviously, time differences, but just an overview, I guess, for the listeners.
Yeah. I would say, see, the platform is very simple and very easy to access and adapted also. Anybody can use it. It's just the initial time they just need it, but then it is very easy to get used to it. The one key function which I will say NBFX has done is like, the time option. Like the treasury desk has a different product. For our business, the time option product is very, very useful. It allows us to take delivery in a window-based delivery. We can take from any time to any time. There will be a start date and there will be an end date. So this is the key success of NBFX platform, I would say. Not
Yes.
many banks in the market have this kind of function. So that is a very, very great feature, which I will say. And then the other one is to get away with paper confirmations. That is real, like time saving and eco-friendly. So the
Yep.
deals done through NBFX, we don't need to give the paper confirmations. I think these two, I would say the best when I'm using the NBFX platform.
Oh, I was going to say it sort of it still irritates me when I have to go to the shop and I get a paper receipt, and I'm thinking to
Yeah.
myself, can you not just send it on email to me? Like, don't waste the paper and all of that. So yeah, I sort of, when you're doing lots of trades, that's lots of paper that gets sent out, or you got to print. So I get it. It's better if it just goes into a ledger system and just gets stored. So look, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to get
Thank
you
you.
to keep your audio on. I'll ask our other speakers to join, and just while they're joining, I'm just going to give a bit of a conclusion, and then we're going to go to some Q&A. So I guess overall, if I look at Treasury, where Treasury was and where Treasury is moving to, some very interesting points around becoming more involved in a strategy perspective, obviously digital adoption. So there's numerous factors. Obviously, the pandemic has made it so that it has enhanced a lot of the Treasury functions, particularly when it comes to risk management around currency, interest rates, commodity exposure. And that's where platforms like NBFX help with those aspects. Obviously, the last few years have seen a significant impetus around, as we said, sort of adoption of new technologies like application program interfaces, machine learning, data analytics. We mentioned their sort of partnerships with fintech companies. So, working very closely with those and almost white labeling some of their products because they can fit into particular holes that organizations have, and it's very easy to take it off the shelf. The adoption of trading bots and on-the-fly simulation capabilities, and then automated liquidity management tools. Bharadwaj talked there about the adoption of blockchain technology, which obviously is very, very big, and how that can interlink around the whole system, particularly for Treasury, can help improve the execution and obviously reduce the processing time. So really, really interesting, I guess, of where Treasury has come from, where it sort of presently is right now, and it's really evolved a lot, but also where the future's going. And I think that will bring us on to some of the questions, that we may have. I've got a couple that have come through, but I will ask our listeners if they would like to ask any questions. Again, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A tab. I'm going to start off with probably one question, and I'll sort of probably start with Caroline first, and then we'll see what each one of you says, if that's okay. But if we were to pick one major hurdle when it comes to digital evolution within the Treasury function, what do you think that is? What's the one big hurdle?
One. I'm not allowed two then.
No.
I'm weighing up between mindset and budget, but I think I would probably go for budget. And
Okay,
that's influencing the rest of the organization to put money behind Treasury.
Nagarajan, you might be able to come up with that next, because you've implemented it. So there we go.
I don't see it as any hurdle because it is helping the business. So I will really not complain about the digital evolution in the Treasury.
What do you think is the one major hurdle, though, when it comes to any sort of digital evolution within the Treasury function? So obviously, maybe not budget for you guys.
On a lighter vein, people who are handling, they have to be active 24/5. Other than that, I don't see any hurdle.
Okay. No, it's Bharadwaj.
I think you've got too many options today. I think too many fintech companies have sprung up, and it's actually a choice which you need to make. Probably not a bad thing to have, but if a bank or a corporate wants to go and adopt a digital technology, I think they'll have to do a lot of work on the vendor selection process.
Look, I probably agree with that. I think yeah, the opportunities are huge, and then how you get validation around those, how you feel that it fits in with yourself. I think that is quite a big one. Second question, and maybe we'll go the opposite way this time. So I'll start with Bharadwaj. You mentioned there about concern around potentially some roles being replaced with sort of digital products, if that made sense. How can individuals be prepared for this?
Yeah, I think the present market scenario is such that almost all organizations are moving towards a digital adoption. So I think as an individual, you have to stay relevant in this market. So you have to keep yourself basically up to breast with what is happening in the market. And there are a lot of training opportunities as well available. You need to upgrade yourself and stay relevant in this market. So that, so if some jobs are made redundant, at the same time, what is important to note is new opportunities keep coming up as well. So that's why your skill set is very important. So keep upgrading and keep yourself relevant is what I would suggest.
Nagarajan, any comments?
I agree, Gavin. Upgradation is the key here. 10 years before, nobody would have thought that, getting into the digital thing will be a very key factor. But now everybody has to foot in, and then, they have to accept this. And going forward, whatever upgradation comes, people have to be much faster than that, and they have to get adaptive to that.
Thank you. Caroline?
I think it's interesting to think about the composition of your Treasury team. And I've heard quite a number of people in different parts of the world talking about how they will be bringing in people with a different skill set in the future. So it's not only about adapting oneself, but it's also using the skill set. So it's this thing about having a diverse team is going to make you more successful, and all the research shows that you become more innovative, and there's greater growth when you have a diverse team. And I think it applies here too. So that's just one thing I would add to the comments made so far.
I was going to say, does that, and I'm just going to ask you a further question out of Caroline, does that mean that sort of, for example, then maybe people that have been within different parts of an organization to come into Treasury because they see things outside? Or are you also talking that maybe people that have come from different industries can move into Treasury? So you might be media, but you go to banking, but you move into, I don't know, F&B, construction, so you get a rounded, holistic viewpoint.
I think it could be from all different areas, but I'm thinking maybe specifically some of the things that I've heard people saying, that going to bring in people who are real data analysts, people who maybe don't have the Treasury skills, but have the IT skills, coding skills, that kind of thing.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, got another question here, and I'll probably start with Nagarajan this time. What is the role of data within the Treasury Department, and I guess how important is it?
As in, from the corporate side you ask, or in the Treasury Department in general you are asking?
Within the Treasury Department.
Yeah. The role of data is going to be very important, because when we deal in a specific currencies or whatever, when you start covering from the risk perspective, everything, you need to know about what you are entering into. The specific, suppose for example, I want to cover euro, I just want to know what is happening around globally, what has happened yesterday, what is happening overnight, what is going to happen tomorrow. From that perspective only, I can start covering, to ensure that my risks are adequately covered, or I can minimize my risk. So data is very key here. So it's not only within what we discuss with the Treasury desk, we individually from the corporate side also, we keep discussing with many forum members, and we collect the data, we discuss, we analyze, then we enter into any trade. So data is very key with respect to any work you do, not only in Treasury, in any work you do, the data is very key.
Okay, thank you very much. Bharadwaj, any commentary?
I agree with what Nagarajan said. I think there is a lot of data actually available out there, be it a financial institution or a corporate. I think the key here is to actually, get credible data first, and data which can be used per se for your transactions, for example. So it's quite important that you actually assimilate the correct information which you have. And these technologies like artificial intelligence, which we were talking about before, they do precisely that. They discard the data which is actually not required, make use of data, make predictive patterns, and also, for a trader, for example, in Treasury, it can actually give you patterns of how the market has behaved and probably likely to behave. So they have this predictive capability. So for that, data, historical data especially, is quite important from a Treasury perspective.
Caroline, anything to add on that?
Well, I'd say you can look at it on lots of different levels. So I'd say, data, your banks around the world having access to data in real time on, what's going on where, it's hugely important. So you can take it at that level. Data in another way, how do you manage data? You mentioned blockchain earlier. So letters of credit, very efficient way, secure way of having letters of credit is to use blockchain. And now you're handling data in a different way. So that's another angle I would look at. And then I would say also, big data, I think the colleagues have referenced that big data and how you capture that and analyze that important. But, what about your strategy? What about corporate finance? The treasurer looking at what M&A deal is a good one to do. that again, your research, your due diligence, that's all around data. I mean, data is information. Everything we do is about information. So the more you can use that data effectively, build it effectively, the more effective you will be. So I think it's not only thinking about how you trade, but it's so many other functions of the treasurer, whether it's raising funds, whether it's investing them, and all that data, ESG data, ensuring that you have that meeting regulatory requirements and the data required for that. There are lots of programs as well about helping you find out what you need to do to meet regulatory requirements. So I mean, it just pervades everything that the treasurer does.
And I was going to say that there's one more question I've got here, but I think that goes well in hand with the commentary you had before when you said about sort of department having more sort of analysts, I guess you could call it data analysts. I think what's interesting is you start to see sort of what they call business data analysts, and that's the bridging gap between the business who can see a lot of the information and then wanting to sort of utilize the analytical information to be able to make a better business decision, but can't put it all together. And you sort of have this sort of piece in the middle. The data is only as good as what goes in. The data is only as good as what you can pull out. And then when you pull it out, how you use it. So I think that that's the important aspects. The final question, and I think that this is one of the big ones, particularly for probably the sort of the UAE and maybe GCC, and I'll probably start with Bharadwaj just to start off with, but how much are APIs important within the Treasury function? And yeah, I'm interested to know this.
Yeah, I think very important, if I had to summarize it. Now, what has happened is a lot of banks in this region started the digitalization process 4 or 5 years back, and they started adopting technologies from different vendors. Now you can't go back in time and undo what you have already done in terms of investments. So APIs are very important in order to build an interface between your existing system and a new system which you are looking to onboard. So your core banking system needs to speak to your treasury front-end system to start with. The treasury front-end system needs to speak to the digital platform if you onboard after a couple of years. So you can't have you can't afford not to have a seamless kind of an interface between two treasury systems. So APIs would enable you to basically reduce on your capital expenditure, and because it's not always practical to go to one vendor and buy the entire set of the software systems comes with it.
Nagarajan, any commentary?
No, I wouldn't like to add anything to this. I'm fine with what Mr. Bharadwaj said because I agree to what he said.
Caroline?
I would just say thanks, Bharadwaj, for explaining what it is. I think often we use these acronyms, and there are many people who get lost at that point. So explaining what an application programming interface actually is really, really helpful. I just add that there's clearly a place. There's been a lot of hype. If it works and it's cheap and it makes everything effective and that's the way forward, great. But there has been a little bit, I think, of disillusionment amongst treasurers recently, saying, well, are they all that people talk about, and are we really as kind of advanced as we say we are? So I think there's maybe some things to smooth out there in the API world, but absolutely critical going forwards to make things more efficient at a lower cost.
Yeah, I think when you start talking about the affiliations with sort of fintechs and different partners, that's where they come into fruition, and it necessarily helps. But I think that it comes down to each individual strategy of what the business is operating. Well, look, I think it's been a really, really good panel discussion. Is there any last commentary that you would like to give before I sort of say thank you very much to the listeners, and sort of I can give you a wrapping up point, I guess, if you'd like to mention that. Is there anything, Caroline, you would like to mention?
Just to say to the audience, keep an eye. This space is so rapidly moving. Make sure you're not left behind. And people, don't like change, but actually grasping hold and learning and researching as much as you can about developments or joining this kind of webinar discussion can be really helpful. So don't be scared. Get that toe in the water and find out more.
And you're going to be, just for the listeners, you're going to be in Dubai for your event in, when did you say it's going to be?
September. Next week we have a breakfast briefing actually. We have a breakfast briefing with Fitch and on the 16th of June in Dubai. But the Middle East Treasury Summit is at the end of September at the Madinat Jumeirah. So if you just go to the acttreasurers.org website, you can find all the details there and get registered to come along.
Great. Bharadwaj, any commentary? Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, there's nothing much to add, probably just one sentence saying that, Treasury, as you were saying before, I think the importance of Treasury has actually come to the fore over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think as a Treasury department, be it in a financial institution or a corporate, I think we have a lot of information in our hands, and top management values that. I would say make use of that, get your seat at the high table, get involved in strategic decisions. And, I think Treasury can really help your organization to actually move forward in the right direction.
And Nagarajan, I'll give you the last words before I close out.
Thank you. The only thing is the upgradation. It is going to keep on happening. 10, 15 years before, we had these statements coming from all banks in fax. Then the interface happened, internet banking happened. Then Treasury has evolved in the last 4, 5 years. So I think the next 5, 10 years, probably in the next decade, we'll be getting the entire Treasury in a small phone only, and then all the transactions are going to happen only through that only. The human intervention only will be reduced. I think that is what we will have to look in for in the next decade probably.
So interesting times in the future. Well, look, thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us today. Thank you very much to all of the listeners as well. We appreciate your time. Hopefully you found something useful. And please keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars in the future as well. But thank you to everyone, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.